The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the cracked windows of the tiny studio apartment with a relentless rhythm that matched the anxiety churning in Elena Morales' chest. She sat at the edge of her secondhand futon, staring at the stack of envelopes scattered across the coffee table she'd found on the curb 2 years ago. Red letters. Final notices. Disconnection warnings. The words blurred together, but their meaning remained brutally clear. She was drowning. At 32, Elena had the kind of exhaustion that showed in places makeup couldn't hide. The shadows under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her shoulders curved inward as though trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her daughter, 7-year-old Maya, slept in the alcove behind a curtain Elena had sewn from bedsheets, and the only privacy the child had ever known. The apartment smelled faintly of damp and the cheap candles Elena burned to mask it. Outside, the city moved with its usual indifference, headlights cutting through the rain, sirens wailing in the distance, life continuing for everyone except her. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she cleaned office buildings, scrubbing toilets, and emptying trash bins while wearing a uniform that never quite fit. At night, she waitressed at a diner where the tips barely covered the cost of childcare. Maya stayed with Mrs. Chen downstairs, a widow who charged what Elena could afford, which wasn't much. But it was something. It had to be enough. Except it wasn't. It never was. The eviction notice had arrived that morning. 30 days. She'd known it was coming. She'd been late on rent for 3 months, on cobbling together partial payments, promising the landlord she'd catch up, pleading for just 1 more week, 1 more day. But patience, like money, eventually ran out. She folded the notice and slipped it into her purse, where it joined the others. Medical bills from when Maya had pneumonia last winter, a letter from the electric company, another from the collection agency handling her student loans, from a degree she never finished because life had gotten in the way. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Carmen. Mom's birthday dinner Sunday. You comin'? Elena stared at the message, feeling the familiar knot form in her stomach. Her family. God, her family. They meant well, most of them, but their pity felt like a weight she carried everywhere. Carmen, married to a dentist, living in a 4-bedroom house with a yard. Her brother, Luis, working in finance, posting photos of his European vacations. And then there was Elena, the one who'd gotten pregnant too young, dropped out of college, married a man who left before Maya's 2nd birthday, and had been scrambling ever since. She typed a response. I'll try. She wouldn't go. She never did. The thought of sitting at that table, watching them exchange glances, the silent communication that said, poor Elena, still struggling, was more than she could bear. She set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. The pressure helped, somehow, like she could push the tears back inside, where they couldn't do any damage. The knock on the door startled her. For a moment, she considered not answering. It was probably the landlord, or worse, someone from the collection agency. But the knock came again, firmer this time, and she heard a voice. Ms. Morales, I have a certified letter for you. A letter. Her heart sank. More bad news, more bills. She opened the door to find a courier holding a clipboard and a thick manila envelope. Sign here, he said, not unkindly. She scribbled her name and took the envelope. It was heavy, official-looking, with a law firm's name embossed in the corner. Whitmore and Associates, Estate Planning and Trust Administration. She closed the door and stared at the envelope. Estate Planning. Trust Administration. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone with money and property and things worth planning for. She tore it open. Inside was a letter on expensive paper, the kind that felt substantial between her fingers. She began to read. Dear Ms. Elena Morales, now we are writing to inform you of a matter concerning the estate of the late Arthur Crane. As per the terms of Mr. Crane's will, you have been named as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of this inheritance. Elena read it twice, then a third time. Arthur Crane. She knew that name. It took a moment, but it came to her. Her mother's uncle, a man she'd met maybe twice in her entire life. Once at a family reunion when she was 10, and again at her grandmother's funeral. He'd been old even then, quiet, dressed in a suit that looked expensive, but worn. She remembered him handing her a $5 bill and telling her to buy herself something nice. That was the extent of their relationship. And now he'd left her something in his will. The letter didn't say what. She turned the pages over, searching for details, but there was nothing. Just instructions to call the law firm. She checked the time, nearly 9 at night. Too late to call now. She'd have to wait until morning. She set the letter on the table, next to the eviction notice, the contrast between them almost absurd. One promised disaster. The other hinted at, what? Hope. Maybe. Or maybe just another complication she didn't have the energy to deal with. That night, she lay awake, listening to Maya's soft breathing, thinking about the letter. An inheritance. It could be anything. A few $100s. A piece of furniture. Maybe nothing at all. People left strange things in wills, tokens of affection that held sentimental value but no real worth. Still, the possibility gnawed at her. What if it was enough to cover the rent? What if it was enough to give her a month, and on just 1 month, to breathe? She fell asleep with that thought, the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. The next morning, she called the law firm during her break at work. The receptionist transferred her to an attorney named Mr. Whitmore, whose voice was smooth and professional, the kind that came from years of dealing with estates and grieving families. Ms. Morales, he said, thank you for calling. I understand this must come as a surprise. It does, she admitted. I barely knew Arthur Crane. Yes, well, Mr. Crane was quite particular about his wishes. He left detailed instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. In your case, he's bequeathed to you a property located at 1847 Riverside Drive. A property. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications she couldn't quite grasp. Well, what kind of property? She asked. An apartment complex, Mr. Whitmore said. Or rather, what remains of one. The building has been vacant for several years and is in a state of significant disrepair. Mr. Crane purchased it decades ago as an investment, but never developed it. Upon his death, the property passed to you. Elena's mind raced. An apartment complex, even in disrepair, that had to be worth something. She could sell it, pay off her debts, maybe even put something aside for Maya's future. How much is it worth? She asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. There was a pause. That's a complicated question, Ms. Morales. The building itself is structurally unsound. The city has condemned it. In fact, there are significant liens against the property for unpaid taxes and code violations. The truth is, the property has negative equity. Negative equity. It means, quite simply, that the debts associated with the property exceed its value. If you choose to accept the inheritance, you would also be accepting responsibility for those debts. However, there is an alternative. Elena's hope, fragile as it was, began to crack. What alternative? The city has been attempting to acquire the property for years. They want to demolish the building and redevelop the land. They've made an offer. $1. If you accept the inheritance and agree to transfer ownership to the city immediately, you can do so for a nominal fee. It would relieve you of any financial burden. $1. The number felt like a joke. So I inherit a worthless building and sell it for $1? Essentially, yes. I realize it's not what you were hoping for, but given the circumstances, it's the most practical solution. She should have said yes immediately, should have thanked him and moved on. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of Arthur Crane handing her that $5 bill, the way he'd smiled at her, a small, quiet gesture of kindness. Maybe it was the fact that everyone in her life expected her to fail, expected her to take the easy way out. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that made her too tired to make another safe, sensible decision. "Can I see it first?" she asked. "The building." "I suppose you could," Mr. Whitmore said, surprised. "But I wouldn't recommend it. The structure is dangerous. If you intend to sell, there's no reason to visit." "I want to see it," she said, more firmly this time. She didn't know why. She just did. And he gave her the address and warned her again about the condition of the property. She thanked him and ended the call, feeling something strange settle over her. Not hope, exactly, but not defeat either. Something in between. Curiosity, maybe. Or stubbornness. She told Maya they were going on an adventure that weekend. The little girl's eyes lit up, the way they always did when Elena tried to make something ordinary feel special. They took the bus across town, transferring twice, until they reached a neighborhood Elena didn't recognize. The streets here were different, wider, lined with buildings that looked like they'd been beautiful once, but had long since fallen into neglect. Riverside Drive was at the edge of the district, where the city gave way to the river. The apartment complex stood at the end of the block, and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. The moment Elena saw it, her stomach dropped. The building was a disaster. 4 stories tall, with boarded windows and crumbling brickwork. The roof sagged in places, and one corner of the structure had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole that exposed the interior like a wound. Graffiti covered the lower walls, bright colors against the gray decay. Weeds grew through cracks in the pavement, and trash littered the lot. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Maya pressed her face against the fence, peering through the gaps. "It's spooky," she said. "It is," Elena agreed. "But it's ours." "Ours?" Maya turned to look at her, eyes wide. "We own this," Elena hesitated. "For now." She didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to tell her daughter that owning this wreck might be the most worthless thing that had ever happened to them. They walked the perimeter of the fence, Elena studying the building from every angle. It was worse than she'd imagined. The foundation looked unstable. The windows, where they weren't boarded, were shattered. The entrance was chained shut, and a sign from the city declared it condemned. Unsafe. Do not enter. She should have walked away, should have called Mr. Whitmore and told him to finalize the sale to the city. But something kept her there, standing on the cracked pavement, staring at the ruin. She thought about Arthur Crane. Why had he left this to her? Of all the people in the family, why her? She'd been nobody to him, a child he'd met twice, someone too insignificant to remember. Unless he had remembered. Unless there was a reason. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She was reading too much into it. The building was worthless. The lawyer had said so. The city had condemned it. There was nothing here but debt and decay. But as they turned to leave, Maya stopped. "Mom, look!" She pointed toward the side of the building, where a narrow alley led to the back lot. Elena followed her gaze and saw something she hadn't noticed before. A door, partially hidden by overgrown vines, hanging slightly ajar. "We should go," Elena said, taking Maya's hand. "It's not safe." "But don't you want to see inside?" Maya asked. "Just a little?" Elena looked at her daughter, at the excitement in her eyes, the way she saw adventure where Elena saw only ruin. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, she did want to see inside. Not because she thought she'd find anything of value, but because she wanted to understand. Why had Arthur Crane held on to this place for so long? Why had he given it to her? "Okay," she said. "But we stay together. And if I say we leave, we leave. No arguments." Maya nodded solemnly, and they slipped through a gap in the fence. The grass was tall, brushing against Elena's knees as they made their way toward the side door. Up close, the building looked even worse. The bricks were crumbling, the mortar flaking away in chunks. The door hung on broken hinges, and when Elena pushed it open, it groaned like something wounded. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the boarded windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors, the most of them hanging open or missing entirely. The walls were stained with water damage, and sections of the ceiling had collapsed, leaving piles of plaster and wood on the floor. "It's like a haunted house," Maya whispered, her voice echoing slightly. Elena tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. "Stay close." They moved slowly down the hallway, their footsteps crunching on debris. Elena peered into the rooms as they passed. Most were empty, stripped bare of anything valuable. But here and there, remnants of the building's past remained. A broken chair, a faded photograph tacked to a wall, the skeleton of a kitchen, its cabinets hanging crookedly, the sink rusted through. It was heartbreaking, in a way. This place had been someone's home once, multiple someones. Families had lived here, cooked meals, celebrated birthdays, fought and made up, and lived their lives within these walls. And now, it was nothing but a shell. They reached the end of the hallway and found a staircase leading up. The steps were warped and uneven, some missing entirely. Elena hesitated. This was where they should turn back. The building was unstable. One wrong step, and they could fall through the floor. But Maya was already tugging her forward. "Can we go up? Just one floor?" Elena looked at the stairs, then at her daughter. She should say no. She should be the responsible parent, the one who prioritized safety over curiosity. But she was tired of being responsible, tired of playing it safe, tired of making the sensible choice that led nowhere. "One floor," she said, "and then we're done." The stairs creaked under their weight, each step a gamble. Elena tested each one before putting her full weight on it, listening for the groan of wood about to give way. They made it to the second floor without incident. The hallway here was in slightly better condition, though the smell of mold was stronger. Elena noticed something she hadn't seen downstairs. Numbers on the doors. Apartment numbers. Faded but still visible. 201. 202. 203. She wondered who had lived in each one. Wondered what their stories were. Whether they'd been happy here. Whether they'd left by choice, or because they had no other option. They were halfway down the hall when Maya stopped. "Mom, look." She pointed to a door at the end of the corridor. Unlike the others, this one was closed. And intact. Elena approached it slowly. The door was solid wood, old, but well made. The number read 210. She tried the handle. Locked. She should have left it at that. But something about the door felt different. Deliberate. Like it had been closed for a reason. She knelt down, examining the lock. It was an old-fashioned keyhole, the kind you didn't see anymore. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair and worked it into the lock, a skill she'd learned in her teenage years, back when she and Carmen used to sneak into places they weren't supposed to be. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. The room inside was dim, the windows boarded more securely than the others. But even in the low light, Elena could see that this apartment was different. It wasn't empty. Furniture still filled the space. A couch, faded but intact. A table with chairs. Bookshelves lined with dusty volumes. In the corner, a desk with papers scattered across its surface. It looked like someone had simply walked out one day and never come back. "Whoa," Maya breathed, stepping inside. Elena followed, her heart pounding. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. She moved to the desk, brushing dust off the papers. Most were yellowed with age, the ink faded. Bills, letters, a calendar from 15 years ago frozen in time. But beneath the clutter, she found something that made her pause. A ledger. She opened it, flipping through the pages. Rows of numbers, dates, names. It took her a moment to realize what she was looking at. Rental records. Arthur Crane had kept meticulous records of every tenant who'd lived in the building. When they'd moved in, when they'd moved out, how much they'd paid. But that wasn't what caught her attention. At the back of the ledger, and tucked into a small envelope, was a key. She pulled it out, turning it over in her hand. It was small, old, with a number engraved on the side. 210B. She looked around the apartment. There was nothing labeled 210B, no closet, no cabinet, nothing that matched. "Mom, what's that?" Maya asked, coming to stand beside her. "I don't know," Elena said. She slipped the key into her pocket. "But we're going to find out." They searched the apartment, opening every door, checking every corner. But there was nothing. No safe, no hidden compartment, nothing that the key might fit. "Maybe it's for somewhere else," Maya suggested. Elena nodded, though disappointment settled over her. She'd let herself hope, just for a moment, that the key meant something. That there was more to this building than decay and debt. They were about to leave when Elena noticed something. The floorboards near the desk were slightly uneven, warped in a way that didn't match the rest of the room. She knelt down, running her fingers along the edge. One of the boards was loose. She pried it up, and beneath it, she found a metal box. Her breath caught. The box was old, rusted at the edges, but solid, and on the front, a small keyhole. She pulled the key from her pocket and slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the box opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of papers. She lifted them out carefully, unfolding the cloth. The papers were documents, deeds, titles, certificates. She spread them across the floor, her hands trembling as she read. The apartment complex. Arthur Crane had owned it outright, no mortgage. But that wasn't all. Beneath the deed was another document. A letter, written in shaky handwriting. "To whoever finds this, I have spent my life making investments, some wise, some foolish. This building was one of the foolish ones. I held on to it too long, hoping it would recover, hoping the neighborhood would turn around. It never did. But I learned something in all those years. The value of a place isn't always in the structure. Sometimes it's in what lies beneath." Elena stared at the letter. What lies beneath? She looked at Maya, then back at the documents, and at the very bottom of the stack, she found it. A land survey, a geological report, and a lease agreement with a company called Riverside Development Corp. Her pulse quickened as she read. The land beneath the building. According to the report, I had sat on a tract that had been rezoned 5 years ago. The city had approved a massive redevelopment project for the area, turning the industrial riverfront into a mixed-use district. High-end apartments, commercial spaces, parks. And the land Arthur Crane had owned, the land Elena now owned, was right in the middle of it. The lease agreement detailed a deal Arthur had negotiated with Riverside Development Corp. They wanted to build on the land. They'd been negotiating with him for years, offering to buy the property, but he'd refused. Instead, he'd agreed to lease the land to them for development, with one condition. He retained mineral and subsurface rights. Elena's hands shook as she read the next document. A geological survey. The land beneath the building wasn't just valuable for development. It contained something else. A deposit. Not oil or gold or anything dramatic, but rare earth minerals, elements used in electronics, batteries, renewable energy technology, the kind of materials that were becoming more valuable every year as the world shifted toward green energy. The survey estimated the deposit's value at $345 million. Elena's vision blurred. She read the number again, and again. $345 million. She sat back, the paper slipping from her hands. It couldn't be real. It couldn't. But the documents were official, stamped with seals from the state's Department of Natural Resources. Arthur Crane had known. He'd known what was beneath the building. And he'd protected it, held on to the property even as it crumbled, even as the debts piled up. Because he wasn't holding on to the building. He was holding on to what lay beneath it. And now it was hers. Maya tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, are you okay?" Elena looked at her daughter, at the concern in her wide eyes, and she wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. "Yeah, baby," she said, her voice shaking. "I think we're going to be okay." She gathered the documents carefully, folding them back into the oilcloth and placing them in her bag. Her mind raced. She needed to verify this, needed to call Mr. Whitmore, needed to understand what this meant, needed to figure out how to protect what she'd just found. But first, they needed to leave. The building felt different now, not like a ruin, but like a treasure chest she'd only just begun to unlock. As they made their way back down the stairs, Elena's thoughts churned. The city's offer. $1. They'd wanted her to sell immediately, to transfer ownership without looking too closely at what she was giving up. Had they known? Had they known about the minerals? Or had they simply wanted the land for development? She didn't know, but she intended to find out. Outside, the rain had started again, a light drizzle that misted over the street. Elena stood on the pavement, looking back at the collapsed apartment complex. It didn't look any different than it had an hour ago. Same crumbling bricks, same sagging roof, same chain-link fence and boarded windows. But everything had changed. She wasn't the struggling single mom who'd inherited a worthless wreck. She was the owner of land worth $345 million. And she had no idea what came next. The bus ride home felt surreal. Elena sat with her bag clutched to her chest, the documents inside like a secret too big to contain. Maya chattered beside her, talking about the spooky building and how exciting it had been to explore. Elena nodded absently, her mind 1,000 miles away. When they finally reached their apartment, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway, holding a casserole dish. "You look pale," she said, studying Elena's face. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Elena managed. "Just a long day." Mrs. Chen didn't look convinced, but she handed over the casserole anyway. "For you and Maya. You work too hard. You need to eat." "Thank you," Elena said, meaning it. She took the dish inside and set it on the counter. Maya ran to her corner, pulling out her coloring books. Elena sank onto the futon, pulling the documents from her bag. She spread them across the coffee table, next to the eviction notice and the overdue bills. The contrast was almost painful. On one side, disaster. On the other, salvation. If it was real. If she could prove it. If no one tried to take it from her. She picked up her phone and called Mr. Whitmore. He answered on the third ring. "Ms. Morales, have you made a decision about the property?" "I need to ask you something," she said. "Did Arthur Crane own the subsurface rights to the land?" There was a pause. "Subsurface rights? Yes, I believe so." "Why?" "Because I found something. Documents. A geological survey. Mr. Whitmore, the land is valuable. Another pause, longer this time. How valuable? $345 million. The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. Then, finally, he spoke. Ms. Morales, where did you find this information? In the building, in one of the apartments. There was a locked box, and inside were papers, deeds, surveys, everything. I see. His tone had shifted, becoming more guarded. Ms. Morales, I think we need to meet. Tomorrow, if possible. This is complicated. Complicated how? I need to review the documents, verify their authenticity, and we need to discuss what this means for the estate. If what you're saying is true, then the property is worth significantly more than we initially believed. But there are legal considerations. Taxes, liens, the city's claim on the property. This isn't as simple as selling the land and walking away with a fortune. Elena's heart sank. Of course it wasn't simple. Nothing in her life ever was. So what do I do? Bring the documents to my office tomorrow. We'll go over everything. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone. Not the city, not Riverside Development Corp., not anyone. Do you understand? Yes. Good. I'll see you tomorrow. He hung up. Elena set the phone down, feeling the weight of what she'd just done. She'd thought finding the documents would solve everything, but it had only created new problems, new complications, new ways for everything to go wrong. She looked at Maya, happily coloring in her corner, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. And she made a decision. Whatever came next, whatever obstacles appeared, whatever fights she had to face, she wouldn't give up. Not this time. Not when she finally had a chance, however slim, to give her daughter the life she deserved. The apartment complex might be a ruin, but beneath it lay a fortune. And Elena was going to claim it, no matter what it took. The next morning, Elena dressed carefully. She didn't own much in the way of professional clothing, but she found a pair of slacks that weren't too wrinkled and a blouse that looked almost presentable. She pulled her hair back and put on the small gold studs her mother had given her years ago. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman trying very hard to look like she belonged in a lawyer's office. It would have to be enough. She left Maya with Mrs. Chen, promising to be back before dinner. The law offices of Whitmore and Associates were downtown, in a building that made Elena feel small the moment she stepped through the doors. Marble floors, high ceilings, men and women in expensive suits moving with the kind of confidence that came from never having worried about rent. The receptionist directed her to the 11th floor, where Mr. Whitmore's office overlooked the city. He was younger than she'd imagined, maybe in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He stood when she entered, shaking her hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. Ms. Morales, please, sit. She settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. Mr. Whitmore sat across from her, folding his hands on the desk. You brought the documents? She pulled them from her bag and slid them across the desk. He examined them carefully, his expression giving nothing away. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, he looked up. These are authentic, he said. The signatures match Arthur Crane's on file. The seals are legitimate. And the geological survey was conducted by a reputable firm. Elena's heart leapt. So it's real. The minerals. The survey indicates a deposit, yes. However, I need to be clear about something, Ms. Morales. The existence of valuable minerals on your land does not mean you have immediate access to $345 million. Extracting those minerals would require permits, environmental studies, partnerships with mining companies, and years of development. It's not a windfall. It's a potential asset. But it's worth something, she pressed. It's worth fighting for. He studied her for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. It's worth fighting for. But you need to understand what that fight will entail. The city wants this land. They've been trying to acquire it for years. And Riverside Development Corp has already begun preliminary work on the surrounding area. If they learn about the minerals, they'll do everything in their power to claim them. How do I protect it? Elena asked, leaning forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Mr. Whitmore pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. First, we need to file a claim with the state to confirm your ownership of both the surface and subsurface rights. That will put everyone on notice that you are aware of the property's value and you intend to defend it. Second, we need to challenge any existing liens or claims against the property. The city has filed for acquisition through eminent domain, but that was based on the assumption that the property had minimal value. This changes everything. What about the company? The Riverside Development Corp? Elena asked. They've been working with the assumption that they would eventually acquire the land through the city. If they learn about the minerals before we've secured your claim, they'll try to tie you up in litigation for years. They have resources you don't. Legal teams, political connections. They'll bury you in paperwork until you give up, or go bankrupt trying to fight them. The words should have discouraged her. A month ago, they would have. But something had shifted inside Elena the moment she'd opened that metal box. She'd spent her entire adult life backing down, accepting less, making do. Not this time. So we move fast, she said. We file the claim. We challenge the liens. We do whatever it takes before they know what's happening. A faint smile crossed Mr. Whitmore's face. You understand this won't be easy. Even with a strong legal claim, you'll face opposition at every turn. The city will argue that eminent domain still applies because of the greater public good. Riverside will claim they have contracts that give them priority access to development rights. And your family. He paused delicately. When word gets out about the value of this property, people you've known your entire life will come forward with claims, saying Arthur Crane promised them something, saying they deserve a share. My family wouldn't do that, Elena said automatically. But even as the words left her mouth, doubt crept in. Would they? Carmen, who'd always looked down on her. Luis, who'd cut her out of family gatherings because she made everyone uncomfortable with her poverty. Her mother, who'd spent years telling her she'd made bad choices and needed to face consequences. She wanted to believe they'd support her, but support and money rarely occupied the same space. I'll file the paperwork today, Mr. Whitmore said, but there's something else you need to consider. Legal fees. This kind of case could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I can work on contingency, taking a percentage of whatever you eventually recover. But there will be upfront costs, court fees, expert witnesses, geological consultants to verify the survey. Do you have resources to cover those expenses? Elena thought of her bank account. $317. No, she admitted, but I'll find a way. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll front the initial costs. But Ms. Morales, son, you need to understand something. The moment I file that claim, your life is going to change. The story will get out. The media will pick it up. A single mother inheriting a $300 million property? That's the kind of headline people love. And with that attention comes scrutiny. People will dig into your life, your past, your finances. Everything you've ever done will be examined and judged. Are you prepared for that? Was she? Elena thought about Maya, about the quiet life they'd built in their tiny apartment. She thought about the whispers that would follow her, the accusations, the jealousy. She thought about her family, their reactions when they learned what she'd been hiding. It would be ugly. It would be painful. But the alternative was walking away, and going back to the eviction notices and the collection calls and the constant grinding fear that she'd never be able to give her daughter better. "I'm prepared," she said. That afternoon, Elena sat in the waiting room while Mr. Whitmore filed the preliminary claim with the state. She watched people come and go, men and women in business suits carrying briefcases, speaking in low, urgent tones. They belonged here. She didn't. But she was here anyway, fighting for something that should have been impossible. By the time she left the building, the claim was filed. The wheels were in motion. There was no going back now. She picked up Maya from Mrs. Chen's apartment, deflecting questions about where she'd been. "Just handling some business," she said vaguely. Mrs. Chen's eyes narrowed, sensing something but not pressing. Elena was grateful when she wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. That evening, she made dinner from the casserole Mrs. Chen had given them, stretching it to last 2 days. Maya chattered about school, about the drawing she'd made in art class, about the friend who'd invited her to a birthday party next month. "Can I go, Mom? Please." Elena's throat tightened. A birthday party meant a gift. Gift meant money she didn't have. "We'll see, baby," she said, the same answer she always gave when she meant no, but couldn't bear to say it. After Maya fell asleep, Elena sat at the table with her laptop, searching for information about rare earth minerals. The articles were dense, filled with technical language she didn't fully understand. But the core message was clear. The world was shifting toward renewable energy, electric vehicles, advanced technology, and all of it required rare earth elements, the kind that, according to the survey, lay beneath her crumbling apartment complex. The demand was growing, the supply was limited, and she owned a deposit worth $345 million. If she could hold on to it, if she could fight off everyone who wanted to take it from her, if she could survive the battle long enough to win. The next morning, everything changed. She woke to 17 missed calls, 6 voicemails, dozens of text messages. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through them. Carmen, Luis, her mother, her aunt, cousins she hadn't spoken to in years, even her ex-husband, who'd vanished from Maya's life without a backward glance. They all wanted the same thing, to know if it was true. She listened to Carmen's voicemail first. Her sister's voice was tight, controlled. "Elena, I just saw the news. Call me. We need to talk." The news. Elena's stomach dropped. She opened her laptop and searched her own name. The headlines appeared immediately. Single mother inherits $345 million. Property after buying condemned building for $1. Struggling waitress discovers fortune beneath collapsed apartment complex. Rare earth mineral deposit could make unknown woman one of the wealthiest in the state. The articles were everywhere. Local news, national outlets, even international sites had picked up the story. Each one featured the same photo, a grainy shot of the apartment complex, looking every bit as ruined and hopeless as it had the first time she'd seen it. They'd found her name, her background, her financial struggles. One article mentioned her eviction notice. Another detailed her 2 jobs. While a third speculated about whether she'd known about the minerals when she accepted the inheritance, or if it had been pure luck. Elena's hands shook as she read. Mr. Whitmore had warned her, but seeing it, seeing her life laid bare for the world to judge, was different than imagining it. Her phone rang. "Carmen." Elena answered. "Is it true?" her sister asked without preamble. "Did you really inherit $300 million? "It's complicated," Elena began. "It's not that simple. The minerals are there, but actually getting to them is going to take years and—" "Oh my God," Carmen interrupted. "It is true. Elena, do you have any idea what this means for the whole family?" "What it means for me and Maya," Elena corrected. "That's who Arthur Crane left it to." Silence. Then, coldly, So you're just going to keep it all for yourself? After everything this family has done for you? Done for me? Elena's voice rose despite herself. Carmen, when was the last time you did anything for me? When I needed help with rent, when Maya was sick and I couldn't afford her medicine. Where was the family then? We would have helped if you'd asked, but you're too proud, too stubborn. And now you have this fortune, and you're going to shut us out? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Elena closed her eyes. This was exactly what Mr. Whitmore had predicted. I'm saying I just found out about this. I don't even know what I'm doing yet. Can you give me some time to figure it out? Fine, Carmen said, but her tone made it clear nothing was fine. But don't forget where you came from, Elena. Don't forget who your family is. The line went dead. Elena set the phone down, and feeling sick. The other calls would be worse. She knew that. Her brother would demand his share. Her mother would guilt her about family obligation, and her ex-husband, God. That would be its own nightmare. She didn't answer the rest of the calls. Instead, she got Maya ready for school, moving through the motions mechanically. Maya sensed something was wrong. Are you okay, Mom? She asked, as Elena walked her to the bus stop. I'm fine, baby. Just tired. You're always tired, Maya said, with the blunt honesty of a 7-year-old. Elena managed a smile. I know, but things are going to get better. I promise. At work, the whispers started immediately. Her co-workers had seen the news. Elena could feel their eyes on her as she moved through the office building, emptying trash cans and scrubbing toilets. During her lunch break, her supervisor called her into the office. Is it true? The woman asked. She was older, heavy-set, with a permanent expression of disapproval. About the property? Yes, Elena said. There was no point lying. Then I'm afraid I have to let you go. Elena's stomach dropped. What? Why? Company policy. We can't have employees with significant outside wealth. It's a liability. Insurance purposes. It was a lie. Elena knew it was a lie, but she also knew she had no power to fight it. I need this job, she said quietly. I have bills. A daughter. Please. The supervisor's expression didn't change. I'm sorry. We'll mail your final paycheck. Elena left the building in a daze. Fired? She'd been fired for inheriting something she couldn't even access yet, for having the potential of wealth while still being broke. She went to the diner next, hoping the evening shift would be different. But the owner met her at the door. Elena, we need to talk. She didn't let him finish. Let me guess. You saw the news, and now you don't want me here anymore. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's not personal, but the customers have been asking questions. And frankly, if you've got $300 million, you don't need to be waiting tables. I don't have $300 million, Elena said, her voice breaking. I have a piece of land with minerals under it that I can't touch. I have debts and legal fees and nothing in my bank account. But sure, fire me because of a headline. She turned and walked away before he could respond, before he could see the tears starting to form. By the time she reached her apartment, she'd lost both jobs. The jobs that barely paid enough to survive but were better than nothing. Now she had nothing, and rent was due in 2 weeks. She sat on the futon, staring at the eviction notice still lying on the coffee table. The irony was suffocating. She owned land worth hundreds of millions and couldn't pay her rent. She called Mr. Whitmore. They fired me, she said when he answered. Both jobs, because of the news coverage. He sighed. I'm sorry, Ms. Morales. Unfortunately, this is common in cases like yours. People make assumptions. They think wealth is immediate. They don't understand the legal process. So what do? I can't pay my bills. I'm going to be evicted. How am I supposed to fight for the property if I'm homeless? I may be able to help with that, he said. There are emergency provisions we can file. I'm requesting immediate access to a portion of the estate to cover living expenses while the main claim is processed. It's not guaranteed, but given your circumstances, a judge might approve it. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe a month. Elena laughed bitterly. I'll be on the street in 2 weeks. Then we'll have to work faster. Come to my office tomorrow. Bring every bill you have, every notice, everything documenting your financial situation. We'll make the case that you need emergency relief. Okay, she said, because there was nothing else to say. That night, she lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Somewhere out there, people were reading about her, judging her, assuming she was rich, while she counted the days until she'd lose the roof over her daughter's head. The next few days blurred together in a nightmare of legal meetings and hostile phone calls. Mr. Whitmore filed the emergency petition, but the hearing wouldn't happen for 3 weeks. Too late. Elena's landlord sent a final notice. She had 1 week to pay or get out. Her family's calls continued, each one more demanding than the last. Her mother finally cornered her, showing up at the apartment unannounced. "You've been ignoring my calls," she said, pushing past Elena into the tiny studio. "We need to talk about this inheritance." "There's nothing to talk about," Elena said wearily. "It's mine. Arthur Crane left it to me." "And what about your family? What about the people who've been there for you your whole life?" "Where were you?" Elena asked. "When I needed help? When I was working 2 jobs and could barely feed Maya? When I begged Carmen for a loan, and she said I needed to learn responsibility? Where was the family then?" Her mother's face hardened. "We've always done what we could. But we can't enable your bad decisions." "My bad decisions," Elena repeated flatly. "Right. Getting pregnant, dropping out of school, marrying a man who left. All my fault. And now I'm supposed to share the one good thing that's ever happened to me, because family." "That's exactly right," her mother said. "Family shares. Family supports each other. Or have you forgotten that?" "Get out," Elena said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my apartment. I have enough to deal with without you guilting me for something I haven't even received yet." Her mother's eyes flashed with anger. "You're making a mistake, Elena. You're going to regret this." She left, slamming the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. Maya emerged from behind her curtain, eyes wide. "Is Grandma mad at us?" Elena pulled her daughter close. "Grandma doesn't understand yet, but she will. Everyone will." She hoped it was true, but she was starting to doubt it. The mockery started appearing online. Someone had leaked her phone number, and now she received calls from strangers. Some were congratulatory, most were cruel, people accusing her of lying, others claiming she didn't deserve the money, a few threatening her outright. She stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The local news ran a segment about her. The anchor interviewed people in her neighborhood, asking what they thought about the story. Most of the responses made her stomach turn. I always knew there was something off about her," one neighbor said. "Too quiet, too secretive." "She's probably making it all up," said another. "Just wants attention." A former coworker appeared on screen. "She was always complaining about money. Now suddenly she's a millionaire. Seems convenient." Elena watched the segment alone, feeling each comment like a physical blow. These were people she'd lived among for years, people she'd smiled at in the hallway, made small talk with at the bus stop. And this was what they really thought of her. The worst came from her ex-husband. He posted on social media, claiming he deserved part of the inheritance because they'd been married when Arthur Crane died. Never mind that they'd been divorced for 5 years. Never mind that he'd abandoned Maya without a second thought. Now, suddenly, he wanted back in. He wanted his share. The comments on his post were a mix of support and skepticism, but enough people sided with him that Elena's lawyer added him to the list of potential claims they'd have to fight. "This is insane," she told Mr. Whitmore during one of their meetings. "All these people coming out of nowhere, saying they deserve part of something that was left to me. How is that legal?" "It's not," he said. "But that doesn't stop people from trying. The good news is, none of these claims have merit. Your ex-husband has no legal standing. Your family members weren't named in the will. The city's eminent domain case is weak now that we've established the property's true value. But fighting them takes time and money, which brings me to our next problem." He slid a document across the desk. Elena picked it up, by scanning the numbers: legal fees, court costs, expert witness retainers, geological survey updates. The total made her head spin. "I don't have this kind of money," she said. "I know. Which is why I've been reaching out to investors. People who might be willing to fund the legal battle in exchange for a percentage of the eventual payout." "How much of a percentage?" "Anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on how much risk they're willing to take." Elena did the math. 30% of $345 million was over $100 million. She'd still walk away with more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But the idea of giving up a third of what was rightfully hers burned. "What's the alternative?" she asked. "You represent yourself. File the motions, appear in court, handle the legal strategy without professional help. I'll be honest with you, Ms. Morales. The chances of succeeding that way are almost zero. The City and Riverside Development Corp have teams of lawyers. You'd be buried before you even understood the rules. So I have to give up a third of my inheritance, or I lose everything." "Yes," he said simply. Elena leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. This was impossible. All of it. She'd found something that should have changed her life, and instead it was tearing everything apart. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. But not too much time. The hearing on the city's eminent domain claim is in 6 weeks. We need to be ready." She left the office feeling more lost than when she'd arrived. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, paying their bills, feeding their kids, not fighting legal battles over fortunes they couldn't access. She envied them. When she reached her building, there was a camera crew waiting outside. They swarmed her the moment she stepped off the bus, microphones thrust in her face, questions overlapping into incomprehensible noise. "Ms. Morales, how does it feel to be worth $300 million? Are you planning to share the wealth with your family? Is it true your ex-husband is suing for part of the inheritance? What do you say to people who claim you don't deserve this money?" Elena pushed through them without answering, keeping her head down. Mrs. Chen opened her door as Elena rushed past, pulling her inside before the reporters could follow. "Vultures," Mrs. Chen muttered. "I'm peering through the peephole. They've been here all day, bothering everyone in the building." "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I didn't ask for any of this. I know, child, but that doesn't make it easier." Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment. "This money, it's real? The land is real. The minerals are real. But getting to them? That's the hard part. Then you fight for it. Don't let these people take what's yours." The old woman's eyes were fierce, protective. Elena felt tears building. "Everyone thinks I'm greedy. My family, the news, strangers online. They all think I should just give it away, or that I don't deserve it." "You know what I think?" Mrs. Chen said. "I think you've worked harder than anyone I've ever met. I've watched you leave for one job before the sun comes up and come home from another after midnight. I've seen you skip meals so Maya can eat. I've heard you cry when you thought no one was listening. If anyone deserves a break, it's you." The kindness was too much. Elena broke down, sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Chen held her, murmuring comfort in Cantonese. When she finally pulled herself together, Elena wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." That night, after Maya was asleep, Elena made a decision. She couldn't control what people thought of her. Couldn't stop the mockery, or the accusations, or the jealousy. But she could control whether she fought or gave up. And she'd spent too many years giving up. She called Mr. Whitmore. "Find me an investor," she said. "Someone who'll fund the legal fight. I don't care if I have to give up 30%. I'm not walking away." "Are you certain?" "I'm certain. This is mine. Arthur Crane gave it to me for a reason, and I'm going to honor that by fighting for it with everything I have." "All right," Mr. Whitmore said. She could hear the approval in his voice. "I'll make some calls. We'll have funding within the week." "Good. Because I'm done being the person everyone expects me to be. The one who backs down, who accepts less, who makes do. I'm fighting for this. And I'm going to win." She hung up before he could respond, feeling something fierce and bright burning in her chest. For the first time since she'd opened that metal box, she felt like herself again. Not the struggling single mom, not the woman everyone pitied or mocked, but Elena Morales, who'd survived everything life had thrown at her and was still standing. The apartment complex still sat at the end of Riverside Drive, while its crumbling walls hiding the fortune beneath. And Elena was going to make sure that fortune stayed exactly where it belonged, with her. The funding came through faster than expected. Mr. Whitmore called 3 days later with the news. A private investment firm specializing in high-risk, high-reward cases had agreed to back her legal battle in exchange for 25% of any eventual payout. Elena signed the contract without hesitation. With money secured, the real work began. Mr. Whitmore assembled a team, a real estate attorney to handle the property claims, an environmental lawyer to navigate the mining permits, a litigator who specialized in eminent domain cases. Each one more expensive than the last, but necessary. They filed motions challenging the city's claim, or requested independent geological surveys to verify the mineral deposit, submitted documentation proving Elena's sole ownership of both surface and subsurface rights. Every piece of paper was another step toward protecting what was hers. But the opposition moved faster. The city filed a counter motion, arguing that the public good outweighed individual property rights. Riverside Development Corp. Entered the fray officially, claiming they had existing agreements with the city that gave them priority access to any development on the land. And then came the surprise. A group calling themselves the Riverside Neighborhood Coalition appeared, claiming to represent local residents. They held press conferences, arguing that Elena's refusal to sell was blocking economic development that would benefit the entire community. The leader of the coalition was a woman named Patricia Drummond, polished and articulate, with the kind of media presence that commanded attention. She appeared on local news programs, always with the same message. "We understand Ms. Morales has legal rights to this property," she'd say, her tone sympathetic but firm. "But we're asking her to consider the greater good. This land could become affordable housing, green spaces, community resources. Instead, she's holding it hostage for personal gain." The phrase, "holding it hostage," caught on. Suddenly, Elena wasn't fighting for her inheritance. She was a villain standing in the way of progress. More cameras appeared outside her building. More strangers called her phone. The landlord, tired of the media attention, served her with an eviction notice citing disruption to other tenants. Mr. Whitmore fought it, but Elena knew it was only a matter of time. She'd become toxic. No one wanted her around. Maya started coming home from school upset. Other kids had heard their parents talking, heard the news coverage. Now they whispered about her at recess, pointed during lunch. One girl told Maya her mom was being selfish, keeping money that should help poor people. Am I selfish, Mom? Maya asked one evening, her voice small. Elena pulled her close. No, baby. Neither of us is selfish. We're just trying to keep what belongs to us. But what if they're right? What if the money should go to other people? Elena's heart ached. Her daughter was 7 years old and already being taught to doubt herself, to shrink, to apologize for existing. Listen to me, she said firmly. Your great-great-uncle Arthur left this land to me, to us. He could have left it to anyone, but he chose us. That means something. And we're going to honor his choice by fighting for it. Do you understand? Maya nodded, but Elena could see the confusion in her eyes. The weight of other people's opinions was already pressing down on her. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Patricia Drummond and the neighborhood coalition. Their arguments sounded reasonable. Community benefit, affordable housing, the greater good. But something about it felt wrong. She opened her laptop and started searching. It didn't take long to find what she suspected. Patricia Drummond was on the board of Riverside Development Corp. The neighborhood coalition had been formed 6 weeks ago, conveniently right after Elena's claim became public. And its funding came from a shell company that traced back to Riverside. They weren't grassroots activists fighting for the community. They were AstroTurf, a manufactured movement designed to put public pressure on Elena to give up her claim. She forwarded the information to Mr. Whitmore with a simple message. They're not who they say they are. His response came an hour later. Good work. We'll use this. But even knowing the truth didn't make the attacks hurt less. The court hearing for the emergency petition finally arrived. Elena dressed in her best outfit, the same slacks and blouse she'd worn to meet Mr. Whitmore the first time. Maya stayed with Mrs. Chen, who'd become more of a grandmother to the girl than Elena's own mother had been lately. The courtroom was smaller than she'd imagined, and with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Mr. Whitmore sat beside her at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, lawyers for the city and Riverside filled 2 rows of seats. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the petition silently, then looked up. Ms. Morales, your attorney has requested emergency access to funds from the estate to cover living expenses. Can you explain your current financial situation? Elena stood, her voice steady despite her nerves. Your Honor, I was working 2 jobs until recently. Both employers terminated me after news coverage of the inheritance. I'm currently facing eviction. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I'm requesting access to enough funds to cover rent and basic necessities while the main claim is processed. The city's attorney rose. Your Honor, Ms. Morales owns property worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She could easily secure a loan against that property to cover her expenses. There's no need to grant emergency access to the estate. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore countered, Mrs. Morales cannot secure a loan because the property's ownership is currently in dispute. No bank will lend against contested assets. My client is being placed in an impossible position. She has legal rights to significant wealth, but no ability to access even minimal funds to survive. The judge frowned. What about family support? My family believes I should share the inheritance with them, Elena said quietly. They've cut off contact since I declined. The judge's expression shifted slightly. Not quite sympathy, but understanding. And the father of your child? He abandoned us 5 years ago. He's now claiming he deserves part of the inheritance, though we were divorced before Arthur Crane passed away. The judge made a note, then looked at the city's attorney. It seems to me that Ms. Morales is trapped in a bureaucratic catch-22. She has assets she cannot access because of legal challenges to those very assets. In the interest of preventing homelessness and ensuring the welfare of a minor child, I'm inclined to grant limited emergency access. The city's attorney tensed. Your Honor, We strongly object. This sets a dangerous precedent. Objection noted, the judge interrupted. Ms. Morales, I'm approving access to $20,000 from the estate to cover immediate living expenses. This is a one-time provision and does not indicate a ruling on the underlying ownership claim. Is that clear? Elena's knees went weak. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. The funds will be available within 5 business days. Don't make me regret this decision, Ms. Morales. I won't, Your Honor. Outside the courtroom, Elena leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. $20,000. It wasn't the fortune everyone thought she had, but it was enough. Enough to pay rent. Enough to feed Maya. Enough to survive while the real battle continued. Mr. Whitmore put a hand on her shoulder. That was a good outcome, but it's just the beginning. The city and Riverside aren't going to back down. Neither am I, Elena said. And she meant it. The $20,000 arrived exactly when promised. Elena paid 3 months of rent up front, bought groceries that filled the refrigerator for the first time in months, and replaced Maya's shoes that had been too small for weeks. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in years, she could breathe without calculating the cost of every breath. But the reprieve was temporary. The real battle was still ahead. Mr. Whitmore's team worked around the clock preparing for the main hearing. The city had escalated their eminent domain claim, arguing that the mineral deposit represented a public resource that shouldn't be controlled by a private individual. Riverside Development Corp. Filed their own lawsuit, claiming breach of contract based on agreements they'd allegedly made with Arthur Crane years earlier. And the fake neighborhood coalition continued their media campaign, painting Elena as a greedy villain standing in the way of community progress. Elena spent her days in legal meetings, learning terminology she'd never needed before. Subsurface rights, mineral estates, severance. Each concept another piece of the puzzle she had to master if she wanted to defend what was hers. At night, she researched obsessively, diving into property law, reading cases that set precedents decades ago, trying to understand the battlefield she'd been thrust onto. One evening, while scrolling through old news articles about Arthur Crane, she found something that stopped her cold. An interview from 20 years ago, when the apartment complex had just been condemned. The reporter had asked why Crane refused to sell, despite losing money on the property year after year. His answer was brief, but deliberate. Some things are worth more than their immediate value. Sometimes you hold on to something not for what it is, but for what it will become. And sometimes you hold it for the person who will need it most. At the time, the statement had seemed like the rambling of a stubborn old man. But now, Elena understood. He'd known. Somehow, Arthur Crane had known about the minerals, known about the coming demand for rare earth elements, known that holding on to this property would eventually mean something. And he'd left it to her specifically, not to her successful siblings, not to her judgmental mother, to Elena, the one everyone had written off as a failure, the one who'd made all the wrong choices and paid for them every day since. He'd left it to her because he knew she'd need it, and more than that, because he knew she'd fight for it. The realization brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't alone in this. Even though Arthur Crane was gone, he'd set this in motion. He'd given her a chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The turning point came 3 weeks later. Mr. Whitmore requested a meeting, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. Elena arrived at his office to find his entire team assembled, laptops open, documents spread across the conference table. "We found something," he said without preamble. "Something that changes everything." He pulled up an email chain on the projection screen. "These are internal communications from Riverside Development Corp., so obtained through legal discovery. Look at the dates." Elena scanned the emails. They were from 8 years ago, before Arthur Crane's death, before Elena had even known she'd inherit anything. The subject line read, "Riverside Property, Geological Assessment Results." They knew, Mr. Whitmore said. Riverside knew about the mineral deposit. They commissioned their own geological survey 8 years ago and discovered the rare earth elements. That's why they've been trying to acquire the property. Not for development, for mining rights. Elena's pulse quickened. So all their talk about affordable housing and community benefit was a lie, Mr. Whitmore finished. They want the minerals. They've wanted them for years. And when Arthur Crane refused to sell, they started working with the city to acquire the land through eminent domain. That's why the city's been so aggressive about condemning the building and pushing for acquisition. Riverside has been funding their efforts behind the scenes. "Can you prove that?" Elena asked. "We can now." He clicked to another document, a series of payments from Riverside Development Corp. To a consulting firm, which, upon investigation, had made direct donations to the campaigns of 3 city council members. The same council members who'd voted to expedite the eminent domain process against Elena's property. "This is corruption," Elena breathed. "This is city officials working with a private corporation to steal land from a citizen." "Yes," Mr. Whitmore said, "and it's about to become public." The news broke 2 days later. Local investigative journalists had been tipped off, likely by Mr. Whitmore's team, and they ran with the story. City officials accused of corruption in land grab scheme. Development Corporation, secretly funded eminent domain, push against single mother. The $345 million cover-up, how Riverside Development hid mineral discovery to steal property. The headlines were everywhere. This time, Elena wasn't the villain. She was the victim. And more than that, she was the brave single mother, standing up against corporate greed and government corruption. The public opinion shifted overnight. Suddenly, social media was flooded with support for Elena. People who'd mocked her weeks ago now praised her courage. The fake neighborhood coalition disbanded within 48 hours. Patricia Drummond resigning quietly and disappearing from public view. The city council members named in the investigation issued statements denying wrongdoing, but 2 resigned within the week. The third was facing a recall petition signed by thousands of residents. Carmen called, for the first time in weeks. "Elena, I saw the news. I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were dealing with." Elena waited, saying nothing. "I mean it," Carmen continued. "I was wrong. We all were. You're not being greedy. You're fighting for what's yours against people with way more power than you. That takes guts." "It takes desperation," Elena corrected. But the apology, inadequate as it was, meant something. "Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe I could help with Maya while you're dealing with all this legal stuff." Elena hesitated. Trust, once broken, didn't repair easily. But Carmen was her sister, and Maya deserved to know her aunt. "Okay," she said finally. "We can talk." Her mother called next. The conversation was shorter, more formal, but the intent was clear. The family was trying to make amends, trying to be what they should have been from the beginning. Elena accepted their efforts carefully, keeping walls up but leaving room for something to grow. She'd learned the hard way that people often showed their true nature when money was involved, but she'd also learned that people could change when they saw their own behavior reflected back at them. The corruption scandal provided leverage Mr. Whitmore used ruthlessly. He filed motions to dismiss the city's eminent domain claim based on evidence of misconduct. He demanded investigation into Riverside's attempts to manipulate the legal process. He requested sanctions against both parties for acting in bad faith. And perhaps most importantly, he got the geological survey authenticated by 3 independent experts. All 3 confirmed the same thing. The rare earth mineral deposit was real, extensive, and conservatively valued at $345 million, potentially more, depending on market conditions and extraction efficiency. The authentication reports were submitted to the court, along with documentation proving Elena's clear ownership of subsurface rights. Arthur Crane's will was ironclad, the chain of title was unbroken, and the mineral rights had never been separated from the surface property, meaning they'd passed to Elena automatically when she inherited the land. The city's attorney tried one last strategy, by arguing that even if the eminent domain claim was flawed, the public interest in rare earth minerals, critical for national security and green energy technology, outweighed individual property rights. Mr. Whitmore destroyed the argument in his response brief. The city claims public interest justifies taking Ms. Morales' property, but what they really mean is corporate interest. They want to hand this land to Riverside Development Corp., a private entity that will profit billions from extracting these minerals. That's not eminent domain. That's theft dressed up in legal language. Ms. Morales has every right to develop this property herself, to lease the mineral rights to ethical companies, or to sell the land at fair market value. What she doesn't have to do is surrender it to a corrupt partnership between government officials and corporate interests who tried to deceive her into giving up her inheritance for $1. The words were powerful, but more than that, they were true. And the truth, Elena was learning, had a weight that eventually crushed lies no matter how well constructed. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early November. The courthouse was packed. Media filled the gallery. Observers lined the walls. Everyone wanted to witness the conclusion of a case that had captivated the city for months. Elena wore a navy dress Carmen had bought her, professional and dignified. Maya sat in the front row with Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted on being there for support. The judge who'd granted Elena emergency funds had recused herself from the main case due to potential bias. The new judge was a man named Harold Brennan, with a reputation for being strict, meticulous, and utterly unswayed by public opinion. Mr. Whitmore had researched him extensively. Brennan had ruled against government overreach multiple times in his career. He believed in property rights, in following the letter of the law, in protecting individuals from institutional power. If Elena was going to win, Brennan was exactly the judge she needed. The city presented their case first. Their attorney, a woman in her 40s with sharp features and sharper arguments, laid out why eminent domain should apply despite the corruption allegations. Your Honor, while we acknowledge mistakes were made in the process, the core principle remains valid. This property contains resources of national importance, resources that could advance clean energy technology, create jobs, benefit the entire community. One individual should not control such vital materials. She was good. Elena had to admit that. The argument sounded reasonable, almost noble. But Mr. Whitmore was better. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, his demeanor calm but commanding. Your Honor, the city's argument rests on a fundamental deception. They claim national interest and community benefit, but the evidence shows their true motivation. The moment they learned about the minerals, city officials began working with Riverside Development Corp. To acquire this land. Not for the public good, for private profit. He displayed the emails on the courtroom screens, in internal communications showing Riverside executives discussing how to facilitate acquisition and streamline the eminent domain process. Texts between a city council member and a Riverside VP planning strategy over dinner. This isn't eminent domain, Mr. Whitmore continued. This is conspiracy, an attempt to use government power to steal property from a citizen who, I might add, had no knowledge of the mineral's value when she accepted the inheritance. My client didn't seek this fortune. She inherited a collapsed building everyone assumed was worthless. She discovered its true value through her own initiative. And now, powerful entities are trying to take it from her, Because she's a single mother, a waitress, someone they assumed wouldn't fight back. His voice hardened. They were wrong. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Ms. Morales has committed no crime, Mr. Whitmore said. She's violated no law. She's simply trying to keep what was legally left to her by a family member who trusted her with it. If this court allows the city to take her property under these circumstances, it sets a precedent that no one's ownership is secure. Not if someone powerful enough wants what you have. He paused, letting the words settle. This court has the power to stop that. To affirm that property rights mean something. That the law protects individuals, not just institutions. I'm asking you to do exactly that. Judge Brennan made notes, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. I'll hear from Riverside Development Corp's counsel. The Riverside attorney was younger, aggressive, confident in a way that made Elena's teeth clench. He argued that even if the city's claim was flawed, Riverside had independent standing. They'd negotiated with Arthur Crane for years. They had documentation showing his intent to eventually lease the mineral rights to them. Elena's inheritance shouldn't void those negotiations. Mr. Whitmore countered immediately. Intent isn't a contract. Mr. Crane never signed a lease agreement. He never committed to any deal with Riverside. And he certainly never gave them rights to minerals he chose to leave to Ms. Morales. Perhaps, the Riverside attorney shot back, because he didn't know about his niece's existence when he was negotiating with us. Objection, Mr. Whitmore said sharply. Ms. Morales is explicitly named in Mr. Crane's will, which was drafted 3 years before his death, and he knew exactly who she was, and made a conscious choice to leave this property to her. Judge Brennan held up a hand. I've heard enough. I'm going to recess for 2 hours to review the evidence in detail. We'll reconvene this afternoon for my ruling. The waiting was torture. Elena sat in a small conference room with Mr. Whitmore's team, unable to eat the sandwiches they'd brought, unable to focus on anything except the possibility that she might lose. Lose everything. Not just the money, but the validation. The proof that she'd been right to fight, that Arthur Crane had been right to trust her. When they finally returned to the courtroom, Judge Brennan looked exactly as he had before. Calm, composed, impossible to read. He waited for everyone to settle, then began. This case raises important questions about property rights, on government power, and the responsibilities we owe to one another as members of a civil society. I've reviewed all the evidence, the geological surveys, the ownership documents, the communications between Riverside Development Corp and city officials. And I've considered the arguments from all parties. He paused. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The city's claim of eminent domain is denied, Judge Brennan said. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The evidence clearly shows that the push for acquisition was driven not by public good, but by private interest. City officials allowed themselves to be influenced by Riverside's agenda, compromising the integrity of the eminent domain process. That kind of corruption cannot be rewarded. Elena felt tears starting but forced them back. Not yet. But he wasn't finished. Riverside Development Corp's claim is also denied, the judge continued. Intent to negotiate is not the same as a binding agreement. Mr. Crane had every right to change his mind, to pursue other options, or to leave the property to whomever he chose. The fact that he chose Mrs. Morales does not obligate her to honor negotiations she was never party to. He looked directly at Elena. Ms. Morales, the property at 1847 Riverside Drive is yours, unequivocally, including all mineral rights, subsurface rights, and any resources contained therein. You have the right to develop it, lease it, sell it, or simply hold on to it as you see fit. No one can take that from you. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Observers cheered or groaned depending on which side they'd supported. Maya jumped up and down, not fully understanding, but knowing her mother had won. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her weathered cheeks. Elena sat, frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. She'd won. Against the city, against Riverside, against everyone who'd said she couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. She'd fought and she'd won. Mr. Whitmore leaned close. "Congratulations, Ms. Morales. You just became a very wealthy woman." The cameras were waiting outside the courthouse, but this time, Elena didn't run from them. She stood on the steps with Mr. Whitmore beside her, Maya holding her hand, and faced the questions calmly. "How does it feel to win?" a reporter called out. Elena thought about it, about the months of struggle, the mockery, the fear, the moments when she'd wanted to give up. "It feels like justice," she said simply. "No, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been told they don't matter. That they should settle. That they should accept less because people with more power said so." "What will you do with the money?" another reporter asked. "I don't have the money yet," Elena corrected. "I have land with valuable resources. Developing those resources will take years. But when the time comes, I'll use it to give my daughter the kind of future I always wanted for her. And maybe to help other people who are where I was, struggling, invisible, told they don't deserve better." "Do you have a message for people who doubted you?" Elena smiled. "I don't need to give them a message. The court's ruling speaks for itself." The transformation didn't happen overnight. Legal victories never led to immediate paydays. But with the court's ruling in hand, everything changed in the ways that mattered. Mr. Whitmore negotiated a proper lease agreement with an ethical mining company that specialized in rare earth extraction. They agreed to pay Elena an upfront fee of $5 million for exploration rights, with royalties on anything they extracted. $5 million. Enough to pay off every debt. Enough to buy a real house with a yard for Maya. Enough to never worry about rent or groceries or whether she could afford to keep the lights on. The money arrived in her account on a Tuesday morning. Elena sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the balance on her phone screen, trying to make sense of the numbers. This was real. All of it was real. She paid off her student loans first, then the medical bills, then every collection agency that had hounded her for years. Watching the debt disappear, now one payment at a time, felt better than she'd imagined. Each zero balance was a chain breaking, a weight lifting. By afternoon, she was free, completely, utterly free. She put a down payment on a house that week, nothing extravagant. A modest 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood with strong schools, but it had a backyard where Maya could play, a kitchen with actual counter space, and a door to Maya's room that closed for privacy. When they moved in, Elena stood in the empty living room and cried, not from sadness, from relief so profound it felt physical. She'd done it. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. Carmen helped with the move, as did Luis. Her mother came by with homemade tamales, a peace offering wrapped in corn husks. The relationships were still tender, still healing. But they were healing. Mrs. Narchen moved into the guest room. Elena had insisted. The old woman had been there when no one else was, had believed in her when everyone else mocked. She deserved better than living alone in that cramped apartment. They became a strange little family. Elena, Maya, and Mrs. Chen, 3 generations navigating this new life together. The mining company began operations 6 months later. The extraction would take years, possibly decades, but the royalty checks started arriving quarterly, substantial amounts that grew as operations expanded. Elena invested carefully, setting up trusts for Maya's education and future. She donated to organizations helping single mothers, women escaping domestic violence, families facing eviction. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and she made sure others in that position weren't forgotten. The apartment complex remained untouched. Elena had considered demolishing it, but something stopped her. That building had changed her life, had hidden the fortune that saved her. It felt wrong to destroy it entirely. Instead, she had it secured, the dangerous areas sealed off, the property fenced properly. Someday, maybe she'd decide what to do with it. But for now, it stood as a monument to perseverance, a reminder that what everyone else dismissed as worthless can contain treasures beyond imagining. 1 year after the court victory, Elena stood in her backyard watching Maya play with neighborhood kids. The girl's laughter rang out clear and bright, unburdened by the poverty that had shadowed her early childhood. Carmen's kids were there too, cousins growing close. Mrs. Chen sat on the porch, shelling peas and humming songs in Cantonese. The life Elena had built wasn't extravagant. She didn't live in a mansion or drive luxury cars. She'd been careful with the money, knowing it was finite, knowing she needed to be smart. But she also knew that wealth wasn't just about numbers in an account. It was about security, options, the ability to choose rather than being forced. It was about Maya growing up without fear, without the constant anxiety that had marked Elena's adult life. Her phone rang. Mr. Whitmore. Elena, I have news. The mining company's preliminary extraction has exceeded expectations. The deposit is larger and purer than the original surveys indicated. They're projecting revised royalties. Substantially revised. How substantially? Elena asked. Best estimate. Over the life of the extraction, what you're looking at somewhere between $400 and $500 million. Elena sat down hard on the porch steps. $500 million. More than the original estimate. More than she'd let herself dream about even after winning. Elena, are you there? I'm here, she said. Just processing. You've earned this, Mr. Whitmore said gently. Everything that happened, all the fights you won, this is the result. Enjoy it. She thanked him and ended the call. Mrs. Chen looked over. Good news. Very good news, Elena confirmed. The old woman smiled. Arthur Crane knew what he was doing, leaving that property to you. Why do you think he did? Elena asked. I barely knew him. Mrs. Chen shrugged. Maybe he saw something in you. Something you didn't see in yourself yet. Or maybe he just knew you'd need it more than anyone else. Either way, he was right. Elena thought about that. About the man who'd handed her a $5 bill when she was 10 and told her to buy something nice. The man who'd held on to a worthless property for decades, protecting what lay beneath until the right person came along. She'd never know his true reasons, but she was grateful. More grateful than words could express. Mom, come push me, Maya called from the swing set. Elena stood, brushing off her jeans. Coming, baby. As she pushed her daughter higher, listening to Maya's delighted squeals, Elena thought about how far they'd come. From the tiny studio apartment, where they'd shared a curtained alcove. From the eviction notices and the empty refrigerator and the constant grinding fear. From the mockery and the accusations and the people who'd said she didn't deserve this. They'd all been wrong, not because of the money. The money was just numbers, just security, just options. They'd been wrong because they'd underestimated her. Underestimated what she'd endure to give her daughter better. Underestimated the strength that came from having nothing left to lose. The collapsed apartment complex still stood at the end of Riverside Drive. Elena drove past it sometimes, curious to see if it had changed. It looked the same. Same crumbling bricks, same sagging roof, same chain-link fence. But she saw it differently now. Not as a ruin, but as a beginning. the place where her life had transformed, where luck and determination and one man's foresight had converged to give her a second chance. She'd taken that chance and fought for it with everything she had. And she'd won. Why, that was the story she'd tell Maya when she was older. Not about the money, not about the mansion she could have bought, or the cars she could have collected, or the lifestyle she could have lived. She'd tell her daughter about the fight, about standing up when everyone said to sit down, about believing in herself when no one else did, about refusing to accept that her life was supposed to be small and difficult and forgettable. She'd tell her that the greatest inheritance wasn't the fortune beneath the ground. It was the strength to claim it. Years passed. Maya grew into a confident teenager who knew her mother's story and took pride in it. The mining operations continued, checks arriving quarterly, the trust funds growing steadily. Elena never had to worry about money again. Never had to choose between rent and food, so between medicine and utilities, between her daughter's needs and her own. But she never forgot what that fear felt like. Never forgot the weight of envelopes marked "Final Notice." Never forgot the judgment in people's eyes when they looked at her old car, her worn clothes, her tired face. She used those memories as fuel, started a non-profit helping single parents with emergency funds, paid legal fees for families fighting eviction, funded scholarships for women returning to school after life had derailed their plans. She gave dozens of people the same chance Arthur Crane had given her, the chance to fight, to hold on, to believe they deserved better. Some people called her inspirational. Others, particularly those who'd mocked her in the beginning, avoided her entirely. Elena didn't mind. She'd learned that validation from others meant nothing. The only validation that mattered was knowing she'd done right by her daughter, honored Arthur Crane's trust, and helped others climb the same impossible mountain she'd scaled. On the 5th anniversary of the court victory, Elena stood in her backyard at a barbecue. Carmen was there with her family. Luis had flown in from his new job. Her mother, older now but softer, sat with Mrs. Chen comparing recipes. Maya's friends ran through the yard, their laughter constant and joyful. This was wealth, Elena thought, not the numbers in her accounts or the property deed in her safe. This, family who'd learned from their mistakes, a daughter who felt secure, a life built on her own terms. The apartment complex was finally scheduled for demolition next month. The mining company needed the surface land for processing facilities. Elena had agreed, with one condition. They'd build a small memorial garden where the building once stood. A plaque that read, "Some treasures are hidden, some are fought for. All are worth protecting." It wasn't elaborate, but it captured the truth she'd learned through months of struggle and doubt and eventual triumph. That the things worth having rarely came easily. That fighting for yourself wasn't selfish. That dignity and determination could overcome power and privilege. And that sometimes a collapsed building bought for $1 could change everything. Elena raised her glass of lemonade, toasting silently to Arthur Crane, wherever he was. To the man who'd seen potential in a struggling niece he barely knew. To the fortune he'd protected and the faith he'd shown. She hoped he knew, hoped he understood what his gift had meant. Not just the money, but the chance it represented. The opportunity to prove that she was more than her circumstances, stronger than her struggles, capable of more than anyone had imagined. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Maya came running over, breathless from playing. "Mom, can we make s'mores?" "Absolutely," Elena said, pulling her close. As they gathered around the fire pit later, flames crackling, marshmallows toasting, stories being shared, Elena felt something she'd thought she'd never experience. Peace. Complete, unshakable peace. The battle was over. The fortune was secured. The future was bright. And the girl beside her, sticky with marshmallow and grinning widely, Tia would grow up knowing that her mother had fought impossible odds and won. That was the real inheritance, not the money in the bank, but the story of how it came to be. The lesson that you don't have to accept what others tell you you deserve, that you can fight and win and build something better than anyone expected. The night before the final court hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood at her apartment window at 3 a.m, watching the city lights blur through tears. She refused to let fall. Tomorrow would determine everything. Win or lose, fortune or ruin, justice or theft. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a physical thing. Behind her, Maya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incomprehensible before settling again. Elena turned to look at her daughter, saw at the small form curled under blankets that had been washed so many times they'd gone soft and thin. This was who she was fighting for. Not for herself, not for vindication or pride or even survival. For Maya. For the chance to give her daughter a childhood that wasn't defined by what they couldn't afford. She thought about all the small humiliations poverty had inflicted on them. The time Maya's class took a field trip to the Science Museum and Elena couldn't afford the $15 entrance fee, so Maya stayed home sick with an illness that didn't exist. The birthday party Maya hadn't been invited to because the other mothers whispered about Elena's worn clothes and assumed she couldn't afford a gift. The school pictures Elena had to decline year after year because the photo package cost more than groceries. Each memory was a small cut, individually bearable but collectively devastating. If she lost tomorrow, those cuts would continue. Maya would grow up learning the same lessons Elena had learned, that wanting more was foolish, that hoping for better was naive, that some people were simply meant to struggle while others floated above on cushions of inherited comfort. But if she won, if she actually won, Maya would learn something different, that fighting back mattered, that standing up to power was possible, that the world could change, even for people like them. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone heard. Not for money, not for fortune, just for fairness, just for the chance to prove that one man's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Maya asked a question Elena had been dreading. "Mom, what happens if we lose?" Elena knelt down, taking her daughter's small hands in hers. "Then we keep going," she said simply. "We find another way. We always do." "But what about the house you showed me? The one with the big backyard?" Maya's eyes were so hopeful, so full of trust, that Elena felt her heart crack. "Maybe not that house," Elena admitted, "but someday, another house. Somewhere good. I promise." "Do you think Great Uncle Arthur is watching?" Maya asked suddenly. The question caught Elena off guard. "I don't know, baby. Maybe." "I think he is," Maya said with the certainty only children possess. "And I think he's proud of you. For fighting." Elena pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, the cheapest kind from the dollar store, but still sweet. "I hope so," she whispered. "I really hope so." 3 months after the court victory, Elena received a letter that made her hands shake. It was from a woman named Jennifer Wu, living 2 states away. The letter began, "Dear Ms. Morales, you don't know me, but I've been following your story since it first made the news. I'm writing because I need you to understand what your fight has meant to people like me." Elena kept reading, her throat tightening. Jennifer Wu had inherited her grandmother's small house, only to discover the city wanted to bulldoze it for a parking structure. Like Elena, she'd been offered a pittance. Like Elena, she'd been told to accept it and move on. Unlike Elena, she'd been about to give up, until she saw Elena's story on the news. "Watching you stand up to the city and win gave me the courage to fight back," Jennifer wrote. "I hired a lawyer, I challenged the assessment, and last week, we won. They're paying fair market value, which means I can afford a down payment on a house for my kids. You did that. Your courage gave me courage." The letter ended with a simple, "Thank you," but those words carried more weight than Jennifer probably realized. Elena folded it carefully and added it to a growing collection. Letters from strangers who'd been inspired to fight their own battles, to demand fair treatment, to refuse to be pushed aside. She hadn't just won her own case, she'd shown others that winning was possible. That evening, she drafted a response to Jennifer Wu, congratulating her on the victory and offering to help if she ever needed advice or resources. So it was a small thing, but Elena had learned that small things accumulated into something larger. Each person who stood up made it easier for the next person. Each victory proved that the system, however flawed, could still bend toward justice if pushed hard enough. One afternoon, 6 months into her new life, Elena drove past her old apartment building. She hadn't meant to. She'd been running errands and taken a wrong turn, and suddenly there it was. The cramped studio where she'd counted pennies and skipped meals and cried silently so Maya wouldn't hear. Someone else lived there now. Elena could see laundry hanging in the window, a different curtain than the bedsheet she'd used. She wondered if they were struggling the way she had, if they lay awake at night calculating which bills could be paid late, if they knew the exact price of every item in the grocery store. On impulse, she parked and went into the building. Mrs. Chen had moved out months ago into Elena's guest room, but other neighbors remained. She knocked on the door of the young couple who lived across the hall, the ones who'd always nodded politely, but never quite met her eyes when her eviction notices were taped to her door. The woman who answered didn't recognize her at first. Elena looked different now, better rested, better dressed. The exhaustion that had been carved into her face had smoothed away. "I'm Elena," she said. "I used to live in 3B. Recognition dawned. Oh my God. You're the one who, with the building and the money." The woman trailed off, embarrassed. "I'm the one who got lucky," Elena said simply. "Listen, I know it's weird that I'm here, but I wanted to ask, are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" The woman blinked. "Why would you ask us that?" "Because I remember what it was like living here, how hard it was, and I'm in a position to help now, if help is needed." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Our car broke down last week," she admitted. "We can't afford to fix it, and my husband might lose his job if he can't get to work. We've been trying to figure out what to do." Elena pulled out her checkbook. She'd started carrying it for moments like this. "How much is the repair?" $2,200, but we can't possibly. Consider it a gift," Elena said, writing the check. "From someone who knows what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to turn." She left before the woman could protest or cry or thank her too profusely. She didn't need thanks. She needed to remember where she'd come from, to remember that the difference between her new life and her old life was one man's generosity and a fortune she'd stumbled into through sheer chance. It could have been anyone. It should have been easier for everyone. During one of her regular coffee meetings with Mr. Whitmore, now as much friend as attorney, he brought up something she'd been avoiding. "You should write a book," he said, "about all of this. People want to hear the full story." Elena shook her head. "I'm not a writer." "You don't have to be. Get a ghostwriter, someone who can help you tell it properly. Because what you went through, what you learned, it matters. Other people in similar situations need to hear it." "I've been getting letters," Elena admitted, "from people who saw the news coverage, or people fighting their own battles." "Exactly. Imagine how many more you could reach with a book." She thought about Jennifer Wu and the dozens of others who'd written, about the single mothers and struggling families and forgotten people who needed to know that fighting back was possible, that winning was possible. "I'll think about it," she promised. And she did. Late at night, after Maya was asleep, she started writing. Not a polished book, just memories. The fear she'd felt reading the eviction notice, the moment she'd opened the metal box, the crushing weight of everyone's mockery, the joy of the judge's ruling. The words came slowly at first, then faster, pouring out like a wound, finally being cleaned. One scene she wrote about hadn't been covered in any news report. It happened a week after she'd received the first royalty check, when she was still adjusting to having money in her account that wasn't immediately spoken for. She'd taken Maya to a toy store, something they'd never been able to do before. "Pick something," Elena had said. "Anything you want." Maya had wandered the aisles, overwhelmed by choice. She'd stopped in front of an expensive dollhouse, the kind with multiple rooms and tiny furniture and working lights. "This one," she'd said quietly. Elena had looked at the price tag, $200. Before, that would have been impossible, laughable. But now? "Are you sure that's what you want?" Elena asked. Maya nodded, then hesitated. "But it's okay if it's too expensive. I can pick something smaller." That moment had broken something in Elena, and her daughter was 7 years old and already trained to scale down her dreams, to anticipate disappointment, to protect her mother from the guilt of saying no. "It's not too expensive," Elena said firmly. "We're getting it." At the register, as the cashier rang up the dollhouse, Maya had asked, "Are we rich now?" "We're secure," Elena corrected. "We don't have to worry anymore. But that doesn't mean we waste things or forget what it was like before." "I won't forget," Maya promised, and Elena believed her. Because you don't forget the feeling of being invisible, of being dismissed, of having to make your dreams smaller to fit your circumstances. That stayed with you, even after the circumstances changed. The book took 8 months to write. It wasn't fancy or literary, just honest. Elena worked with a co-author who helped shape the narrative, but the words were hers. The truth was hers. When it published, she braced for criticism, for people saying she was exploiting her story, for accusations of cashing in. Instead, it became a bestseller. Not because it was beautifully written, but because it was real. Because thousands of people recognized themselves in her struggle. Because hope, especially hard-won hope, was something people needed to believe in. The book tour took her across the country. At each stop, people lined up with their own stories. A woman fighting to keep her family farm. A man trying to protect his mother's home from predatory developers. A teenager who'd inherited debt along with his father's business. Elena listened to all of them, offered what advice she could, connected them with resources, that paid for legal consultations when they couldn't afford them. She couldn't save everyone, but she could help. And helping felt better than anything the money had bought her. During a book event in Chicago, an elderly man approached her after the signing. "I knew Arthur Crane," he said. Elena's heart jumped. "You did?" "Worked with him, back before he retired. He was a good man, honest, fair. But life hadn't been kind to him. Lost his wife young. Never had children. I think he carried a lot of regret about that." "Why did he leave the property to me?" Elena asked. "I barely knew him." The man smiled. "He talked about you once, about seeing you at your grandmother's funeral. Said you reminded him of his wife. Same determination in your eyes. Same refusal to be diminished. I think he saw something in you that day, on something that told him you'd fight for what was right." The revelation settled over Elena like a blessing. Arthur Crane hadn't left her the property randomly. He'd seen her, really seen her, and he'd trusted that she'd be strong enough to claim what he'd left behind. "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice thick. He'd be proud, the man said, of what you've done, how you've used it, not just for yourself, but for others. After he left, Elena sat alone in the empty bookstore, crying quietly. Crying for Arthur Crane, who'd seen potential in a struggling young woman at a funeral. Crying for her younger self, who'd believed she'd never amount to anything. Crying for Maya, who would grow up knowing her mother had fought and won. And crying for all the people still fighting, still struggling, and still hoping for their own impossible miracle. The inheritance had changed her life. But more than that, it had changed her. She was no longer the woman who accepted less, who apologized for existing, who made herself small to avoid inconveniencing others. She was Elena Morales, who'd taken on the city and won, who'd exposed corruption, who'd proved that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. That was the real fortune Arthur Crane had left her, not the money. The knowledge that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. That was the inheritance that would last forever. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.